Join our knowledgeable hosts as they dive into the captivating universe of comic books, movies, TV shows, and pop culture. Get ready for vibrant discussions and a shared enthusiasm for all things superhero and beyond. A comic podcast straight from the panels. This is Beyond the Capes.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Cape podcast. With us today is Deb and Christopher. You might have seen or heard their podcast, Mangasplaining, along with Mangasplaining Extra, some of their publications as they bring manga to the general masses. We are also going to discuss their partners with Fantagraphics and for the new manga coming out, Search and Destroy. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right, so first and foremost, anime, which has seen quite a boom, because I know being a 90s kid myself, that was not something you always wanted to admit to in the 90s.
Wow.
And now it's everywhere. And
Yeah.
I wish I was growing up in this time frame because, man, it would have been a lot easier to find stuff. What brings you guys to anime and kind of putting out publishing?
I actually am a lifelong comics reader. I started with Transformers #3, guest starring the Amazing Spider-Man, of course, and then sort of progressed from there to G.I. Joe, and then I was curious about these X-Men comics that all the kids in my classes were reading, and then I ended up working at a comic book store and reading, I think, pretty much every single comic created between 1991 and 1999. Anything that had a monthly release, I was just reading. So I've got a ton of very useless knowledge locked up here. But it was while I was working at the comic store that a magazine called Pulp, made by Viz, who are now known for like Shonen Jump manga and things like that, was released. And I got that at the comic book store, and I was like, whoa, what is this weird manga that doesn't look like the other stuff that I've seen before or read before? And it sort of set me on a path of like, well, what is going on in manga? Like, what is going on in these Japanese comics that we're getting? And, you know, led me to learning more and more and more and more until finally it was like all I was reading for a while. So, I think working in North American comics, working in festivals and conventions, and then, you know, finally it was like, well, maybe I should try working in manga since I like it so much. And it's been a lot of fun since then. It's just actually last year that we published our first manga, which has got a sticker on it, which is called Okinawa, by Susumu Higa, and it was co-published with Fantagraphics. We published the digital edition, Mangasplainingextra.com, and Fantagraphics did this beautiful hardcover edition that has won a bunch of awards, which we're really, really excited about. That was the sort of the genesis of, in some ways, of what I'm doing now is just a lifelong love affair with comics, slowly growing into realizing the diverse array of stories and storytelling that were available in Japanese manga. It's funny because I read so much stuff, but so much of it was either superheroes or kind of felt like a response to superheroes. There wasn't a lot of stuff in between, like general interest comics for a long time. I think if the kind of Image comics that we have today existed in 1992, instead of the Image comics of 1992 with the Wild Cats and Youngbloods, I think I would be in a different place as well as a reader. But, you know, I was growing up and it wasn't doing it for me the same way anymore. And manga had just all these other genres of storytelling, all these really interesting works. And it changed a lot for me. And I'm glad to be here today. I think Deb's got a fun version of that story as well, because you're, rather than comics, a lifelong manga reader from when you were very young.
I've always read American comics too. We would buy it at the corner store and stuff like that, or the newsstand. Your usual Archie, Marvel, Harvey Comics, Little Dot, Richie Rich kind of stuff. But I'm Japanese American, so I grew up surrounded by Japanese culture in Hawaii. We had 2 Japanese bookstores. We had 3 Japanese language movie theaters, Japanese TV stations. I could watch anime, it's subtitled anime in Japanese, and it was just kind of like we're surrounded by it, and I didn't realize that that was special. You know, in the way that a goldfish doesn't realize they're in water.
Exactly.
So, you know, and then my uncle, he would have like he would buy some manga magazines, and you know, that's how I discovered Tiger Mask, you know, which is like this very violent wrestling manga, you know, and I got into shoujo manga because one of my aunts bought me a shoujo manga magazine. And I guess one of the reasons why I fell in love with it is that even though I couldn't really read Japanese, I could understand the story. The visual storytelling was so strong. I could get what was happening, you know, like, oh, someone's upset, or like, oh, wow, this is really exciting. And so it was something that, and also too, you know, I was always into drawing. So manga basically, you know, showed me that, you know, that being a comic artist was a girl's job too, you know, and that wasn't something that was obvious as being special until I went to my first, you know, San Diego Comic-Con in the early 90s and realized, wow, I'm like one of the few women, you know, trying to draw comics out there. And of course, things are way, way different now. And I think a lot of that's thanks to manga and anime, because, you know, it's about a lot of different things, right? You know, I call it Generation Sailor Moon, like this whole generation that was introduced to comics and anime that was exciting for girls, right?
Yeah.
So now, like, it's, you know, I teach at California College of the Arts now, and I teach a class on manga. And I'd say, you know, generally speaking, in these programs, more than half of the students are female. And a lot of them, male and female, are creating works heavily influenced by manga and anime. So it's been really, you know, I mean, I'm an oldster, so it's been really, you know, interesting watching this evolution happen in my lifetime, and you know, and seeing, you know, people going from like, you know, like when Fred Schott wrote the book Manga, like he had to have a subtitle in the book saying, you know, the world of Japanese comics.
Because no one knew what that word meant.
Correct. And then now manga, like the other day, like a bunch of my friends were texting me going like, did you see the Wordle on New York Times Wordle puzzle today?
Oh no, was it manga? I didn't do one of them this week. Oh wow.
It was manga. And so it was like, oh my God, we've come a long way, haven't we?
We've arrived.
Anyway, yeah. I mean, but I read, you know, of course, I was an X-Men, you know, Teen Titans reader. I read ElfQuest, Sandman, all that stuff. But maybe over the last 10, 15 years, I've really kind of heavily gone to the manga side. Like I mostly read manga and webtoons now. So when we do Mangasplaining, and we have Chip, and Chip is like the writer of Batman and Daredevil, and David, who's our other co-host, is also an omnivore, right? He likes both. He used to work for Image Comics, and he's an editor at Viz Media now, so he knows both worlds very, very well, as does Christopher. So sometimes they'll make references to certain Marvel artists or Marvel or Image characters, and I'm like, oh yeah, you don't say.
Sometimes we comic-splain back to Deb.
Yeah, we actually did an episode like that.
Oh, right.
Oh yeah, please explain, Chris.
Well, no, we did the Daredevil episode. Has that? Sorry, I apologize. Has that come out yet? Okay, it's in. So yeah, season 5 of Mangasplaining is kicking off soon, and it's funny you mentioned manga because that's actually the first book that we cover. And man, if you ever want to get an idea of just like how much the appreciation and understanding of manga has changed since 1983 when that book was originally published, that's the episode for you. That'll be coming out sometime in August. But we're giving away secrets here on your podcast. We did an episode of Comicsplaining where we read Daredevil Born Again by Miller and Mazzucchelli, and everyone was like talking comics to Deb. It's pretty good. It's gonna be a fun season of Mangasplaining coming up. So yeah.
I was like, what's with all these talking heads thing? They're just talking.
There's so many panels on the page.
Oh my God, what is this?
It's way too saturated. What's going on here? Stuff like that.
So, yeah, we have fun.
Perfect. Now it's interesting. Obviously, you guys have a lot of experience in both comics and manga, and it's crazy because when you look at it, they are very. I mean, it's very similar when you look at Marvel and DC and kind of what manga's done, but yet you still have such a distinct difference in the genre. And I think it's comics, I would say, are still attracting a certain degree of people at San Diego, but I think you're seeing a lot of people also starting to turn to manga. Do you have any thoughts onto why? Is it just something new that people are looking for, or people have finally kind of found like the formula to really kind of attract a more broader audience to manga?
I have like a ton of thoughts on that, but I think Deb, we've talked a little bit about this. I think it's two parts. One is that manga's just really good. Not, like as a genre, there's hits and misses, right? Just like there is with everything. But the specialty of manga, at least as we read it in English, is we're only getting a tiny percentage of the actual total output of what's coming out in Japan, and it tends to be cherry picked by publishers and editors at those publishers as like the best of the best. So the general standard of quality tends to be really high. And it's like, if we got everything, I think you'd see there's a lot of just absolute trash. A lot of crappy manga in Japan. There's so much of it. But there's a lot of really great stuff, and we're getting most of that. And that's kind of awesome. And as the market develops, we can actually get some of the like a more off the wall or off the beaten path kind of stories, and there's a big enough market to support that as well. But the other half of it is that, like, yeah, there's a happening, man. Speaking of being an oldster, there's a trend towards manga and anime right now, and because there's basically unfettered access through both legal and illegal means, people can discover it and just keep reading and keep going. You know what I mean? So like the last time we had a really big trend in manga, there was a huge manga crash afterwards because the production and the quality couldn't really sustain the interest, and it was a fad. It sort of went like this, and then really crashed hard, and then took another 10 years to build back up to where it was before. Now there's unlikely to be a crash because there's a much bigger base of informed readers that are excited and reading diversely and not just buying it, to have it or to collect it, sort of a thing. And so I don't think that crash. I think it's more unlikely the crash will come. So yeah, it's kind of both things, but also a lot of other things as well. It's obviously manga publishing is intricately tied into anime success as well, and you see it in the sales charts. Anything that gets an anime, the manga tends to do real well, a lot better. So
it's notable. Like what was it? I did a slide for a marketing presentation. I said, this is the month before Spy Family anime debuted. It was like there was one volume of it on the top 10 of ICV2 Bookscan,
which is good. Then, it's doing well, right? Like,
and then the month after, it was like 8 out of 10. 8 volumes of Spy Family took up the top 10 of that same chart. So it's noticeable. Let's put it that way.
So yeah, I think as long as all these things keep feeding into each other, as long as the bookstore distribution system doesn't collapse, which we've all got our fingers crossed it doesn't, I think manga will be around for a really, really long time.
And I mean, let's not forget our friends at the libraries too, right?
Oh yeah, shout out to the libraries.
Yeah,
libraries are a huge source of ways for people to get introduced to manga and get hooked on it. The other thing is that we now have more of the Japanese publishers have apps or websites that give you the latest chapters at a pretty reasonable price. You can binge read all of Demon Slayer on the Shonen Jump app for like $2.99, $3.99 a month, and it's and what's interesting about that is that that doesn't affect the print sales. Like it makes it gives people a painless way to be introduced to it and enjoy it. And then, well, I mean, this is an interesting thing about American is that in every other market that I'm studying, Korea, Japan, they are 60-70% digital.
Yeah.
Whereas America is pretty firmly like it's 10% digital, 10 or 15%.
6% is the last estimate.
No.
Yeah.
No.
6 to 7% is the last estimate I found. And it's and you compare that to literally 60% of the market is digital in Japan. And it's wild. And there's a lot, especially younger kids don't really discriminate between reading anyone under the age of 21, let's say, don't discriminate between reading digitally and reading physically. They're just reading. They're just taking in the content, right? And if they love something enough, then they'll like ask for it for Christmas, or use their pocket money, their birthday money, whatever, and get the thing.
Scholastic book clubs,
Scholastic book clubs, yeah, that's a good one. Good one. So yeah, I think we just exhibited at ALA and the American Library Association, annual conference, and it was shocking how many comics and how many comics publishers were there, how excited librarians were about comics from all different publishers. Skybound's booth did gangbusters. I was set up right across from them, and they were really busy that whole weekend, and they talked to a lot of people and spread the good word with Transformers and Invincible.
But guess who wasn't there?
Marvel and DC. So
not to be catty about it, but
yeah, we're not trying to be catty, but like the enthusiasm and excitement about comics was like palpable, and the historic two biggest publishers in North American comics were just like, we're not going to show up. And it's a metaphor for a lot of the industry right now. But shout out on Image, shout out on Skybound. All those awesome publishers that showed up. And then, learning that like you got a library card, your library card will get you access to whatever digital, program your library subscribes to, which will have at minimum thousands of comics to read for free that'll download automatically to your Kindle or your iPad or whatever. Like, I think a lot of people don't really realize that. Go get a free library card and you can read thousands and thousands of free digital comics through your library, like through your local library. So yeah, especially the way that libraries are getting targeted for bans and book bans these days, the digital collections managed to escape a lot of people's notice. So by all means, go get yourself a library card, go sign up, see if they got Overdrive, see if they got Comics Plus, see if, whatever they got, and get yourself some free comics to read. It's a good time.
I mean, I'll also say that, when we started doing our podcast, we knew that there was a gulf between people who read manga and know it really well, know the culture, know all the tropes and all the terminology and stuff like that, and all the history to different degrees, right? And the people who read American comics. And that was really evident in Chip, who is our friend, right? Like, we all went to Japan together, and Chip, who is a, hardcore, he's writing some of the best-selling comics out there. And this was like in 2019, before the pandemic, and just wowed and like overwhelmed by the manga culture in Japan. How much manga was being published? We went to several museums that were dedicated to single manga artists.
Yeah,
not just manga in general, but just a legendary manga artist. And so and then everywhere you look, the train posters are like manga. All the biggest sections in the bookstores are manga. Manga's just huge, and it's just woven into the life in Japan. So he was just kind of like, I guess I gotta start reading this stuff, huh?
Overwhelmed and depressed is a really good way to put it.
Yeah, he explained.
But he did sit us. We were on the train. We were on a pretty slow moving train, and he's like, "What if?" You leaned over. He's like, "What if we did a podcast where you guys just explained manga to me, and we could call it Mangasplaining?" And I'm like, "Come on!" And sort of laughed him off. And then the pandemic started, and he was like, "What if we did that podcast?" And I'm like, "Great! I'm not doing anything. I don't think anyone else is either. Let's go. Let's Mangasplain this up." And so that's the secret. The very slow train between Hakone. No. Would have been a good anecdote if I could have nailed it.
I think it was Hakone and
not Hakone. It's the north one.
No, it's Hokkaido, Hakodate.
Hakodate, yes, Hakodate
and
Sapporo.
What's the name? Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's the one, right? Because Hakodate is on the southern part of Hokkaido, which is the northernmost island, and then you get the bullet train there, and then you have to transfer to a slower train to get to Sapporo, which is the main city. So that was the slow train.
That was a 3-hour tour up through the mountains.
Oh man! All right, plenty of time.
Yeah. Just
good thing we all like each other.
Yeah, and I'm glad you guys brought up digital because I think I tell a lot of people for comics, Comixology through Amazon Kindle. I think it's like an extra $5 or $6 a month, and they have all the Invincible, and you could just check out books. You just have to return them.
Yeah,
And I'm more impressed with the digital because I think it was Solo Leveling. I had read it on Webtoons a long time ago, and I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. I wonder if this is actually going to get picked up. This is crazy what's happening. And I think it was only a couple months, and I was going through I think Crunchyroll. I'm like, this seems oddly familiar. Did I read this a long time ago? And I was impressed by how much of it now is getting put into like the books, and how much the sales and stuff have jumped up from where it was at Webtoons. I think it's like 600 chapters, I think, when I read it on Webtoons.
yeah,
And now they're just, I mean, that show Webtoons is just
series. It's incredible. It's like it's a real game changer, and I don't think people realize it, because even the people in Japan were shook.
Yeah. No one
It-
expected
Yeah,
that anime to take off the way it did, and it really did. Especially because you look at those first couple chapters and you're like, "What is this?" And then,
Yes.
yeah, it gets real good
And
real
then
quick.
Then it goes, and then when it hits the gas, it hits the gas, and you're in for the ride.
and I'm more impressed because, as you guys said, what doesn't come to America is a lot. And I found this out the much long way when I read the original Pokemon series and Yu-Gi-Oh. And I never realized how many people died in both. I was very impressed by that. I was like, I don't remember this. Obviously, we're never going to see that animated or even that book probably come
Oh no,
stores
those
today.
those
But
books came out. They started releasing the anime with the card arcs in Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah.
But Viz did go back, I think, and print all the pre-card stories where, yeah, it's just, Yugi and whatever he turns into, Kaiba just straight up murdering, like sending people to the dark dimension, which is straight up murdering them, right?
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. And then Pokemon, there's before Pokemon became an international juggernaut, Viz did publish a few books. You can find one of them around without too much difficulty, called The Electric Tale of Pikachu. But there was a bunch of stuff in that vein, and there was a bunch where they weren't sure Pikachu was going to be the lead character. They thought it was going to be Clefairy, was going to be the like character that everybody. Yeah, I know. So there's like a ton of Clefairy centric manga in Japan. Deeply inappropriate. A lot of poop jokes, a lot of other inappropriate jokes for the kiddos. And so, yeah, the Pokemon Company is pretty smart about what does or doesn't get translated these days. You're never going to see those. You go to Japan, I think, and buy them at used stores, but I don't even think they're in print anymore. But we do get all the new Pokemon stuff, for example. And Yu-Gi-Oh, even though it's out of print, it's not too expensive to find. Like the shine's off it a little bit in terms of manga and anime, but the cards are still huge. Like the card game is still massive, both here and in Japan. It's doing crazy well.
The Olympic runner who brought all his Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
Yeah.
Olympic
time trials. It's like peak nerddom.
That's the way to do it. Yeah. All right, so you guys made Mangasplaining. You kind of started during COVID times. You started introducing people to manga. What made you then want to get into the publishing side of things and kind of get into helping people find manga? Because that's a whole different thing to discuss it, but then helping people.
Well, I think, like Chris, like the publishing thing was something. It largely came about because of Substack, honestly. Like Chip had a Substack newsletter, and then he had gotten a little grant from them to, as they were to put this real effort to bring more comics onto their platform. And so he made introductions, and we sold ourselves as the only manga. And we would be publishing manga as part of our Substack newsletter. People would, of course, it would be free, and it would have our podcast, but people who paid a subscription could get access to full chapters of manga that was never available in English before. So, so that's kind of how that went.
Yeah, I'd been working on Okinawa with Jocelyn Allen and Patrick Crotty and my husband, Andrew Woodrow Butcher, for a long time, and just sort of lacked the resources or time before the pandemic hit to actually sort of finish it and get it released. Yeah, time management was not one of my stronger skills. I'm working on it, and more like taking on too many projects was one of my best skills. Substack came in and they're like, we could do this, and I realized that if we could actually serialize it and use that time to edit the chapters, re-edit the chapters as we went, do the layout and formatting at the same time as we did it for for Fantagraphics and Substack, that would actually be great. And luckily they agreed. They're like, oh, a manga about the Second World War and how it went on Okinawa and then President Okinawa, sure, sign me up. And I was like, really? And they're like, well, you're going to do other stuff too, right? And I'm like, yeah, we'll do, contemporary fantasy stuff. People will love it. It'll be like an Image comic. And they're like, okay, great. And that's kind of where Search and Destroy came from. But yeah, we did that. And then Fantagraphics still wanted to work with us, which was great. And it was a different way. We were originally going to try and do it as like a crowdfunding situation, but that takes up even more time. I mean, shout out to anybody who's who's crowdfunding a comic. It takes a tremendous amount of effort to do that and do that right. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that like it's a full-time job for the 30 days that you're running a Kickstarter, right? So
much less afterwards fulfilling everything.
Oh my God, right? I never want to have cases or pallets of books that I have printed in my house, especially not Okinawa. It's almost 600 pages. It is a thick book. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So,
and we were very lucky because the design team at Fantagraphics did an amazing job of putting together what were 2 books in Japanese into 1 volume, designing the cover practically from scratch. It's beautiful, and it's just great. It's just a great presentation. We're so proud of it, and it's not something. I think it's a case of where we were better together.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the sense that they have the distribution, they have the design, and
and the marketing. Shout out to Jack expertise. Cohen, who's no longer with Fantagraphics, who's actually joined Korean Webtoons. But we started that, and then it was like, okay, we got to have books to follow up with. We started the licensing process, and we didn't. I knew licensing took a long time, but I didn't think it took that long. Yeah. Especially with the contacts, with support of the artists in most of the cases, going to the publishers. And so the serializations, there was like a full year, almost a 8-month gap between the end of Okinawa and our next book. And people were really chill about that, which is nice. But we started it basically 3 weeks in. We were like, okay, let's start this licensing process. Let's get these other books. So we reached out and worked with Frederick at Tezuka Productions to bring Search and Destroy into the world, which is the book that is launching next week. Actually, it's actually I was just what's that called? Vanity Googling the book title, and copies are already out in Barnes and Nobles everywhere. They put it out early, so if you're going to a BNN, grab yourself a copy. But yeah, it comes out next week officially, and that was something where the author of that is Atsushi Kaneko, and Atsushi Kaneko is someone that I've always thought is criminally underrated in English. They did a book called Bambi and Her Pink Gun, which DMP released in a terrible Digital Publishing. Publishing released like basically during the years just before the crash, and
in the mid 90s or early 2000s, I forget which.
Yeah, and it just didn't work out, unfortunately. But it was no skin off his back. I think he's an amazing creator, and I knew that Tezuka would be a little bit easier for us to work with than, say, a Katakawa or a Shogakukan, which are the uphill climb of working with established Japanese publishers is much higher. Whereas Tezuka is much smarter about licensing stuff to North America, and you can see that in some of their other projects, like Unico, which is a project that Deb worked on and is working on, that's coming out from Scholastic in the fall, actually in August, right?
And what do you call Team Phoenix?
Yeah, Team Phoenix with Udon. That's a 5-volume manga series that's wrapping up really soon. So yeah, Search and Destroy. We actually reached out to we reached out directly to Akane Torikai to do our book with her, which we ended up calling Wandering Cat's Cage, and she put us in touch and helped us navigate the Katakawa licensing system. We reached out to 3 publishers through Udon, which is another publisher we work with, and that experience different publishers, different licensing rules, totally different situation on what we could and couldn't do with the books. But it ended up that our first book is coming out soon. It's called Gigatown, A Guide to Manga Iconography, and that'll be out through on in October. So yeah, we started all these projects and asking about them pretty much at the same time, and it has taken 2 years in most cases for some of them to get to print, and others are further down the road. So yeah, the process always takes longer than you think it's going to take, and sometimes much longer. We've actually been kind of fortunate in a lot of cases, so that's nice.
Definitely. So that's crazy having 2 books out. Obviously your book in October will be great. Search and Destroy, so obviously that's out now. I think for those that know anime and know manga, the description is very interesting because Dororo is a great show. I did not know what I was watching that first episode.
Oh wow!
I was very confused, and then I slowly understood. Okay, this is the route we're taking. And I thought I thought I knew what it was going to be about. Which obviously for those that are not listening, a father who made a pact with demons who sold essentially all of his son's organs, was then rehabilitated, given false parts to try to reclaim essentially his life by slaying him. That's the quick version of that.
And it's set
it
in
was crazy how raw.
Yeah.
That was the other crazy part, was how advanced some like the prosthetics were for that time period.
Yeah.
I think what really took me by surprise is the story and how real it got halfway through when he could finally start talking and feeling like emotion and pain. I was not really prepared for that. So when you guys said that this is that story, but set in cyberpunk kind of futuristic, I'm very curious to see how that's going to work out, because there's so much room to play with that design.
It's
I don't
so
think I have
incredible.
a favorite part of this.
Gender bent too. I mean, the way that Kaneko retold the story, and Kaneko Sensei what he retells her, and the fact that Tezuka Pro gave him permission to do this radical retelling, because like Dororo, like it's not Hyakumaru anymore. It's Hyaku, it's a girl, and it's set in like this kind of vaguely Soviet looking future where robots are rule, and then people are separated into either creatures, or humans. I think the creatures are basically the robots who are kind of lording over everybody, right? I mean, in the volume 1, one of the key scenes is one of the I guess, the creature, one of the robots is just a glutton. He's like relishing all this food because he has Hyaku's tongue, human tongue.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing like it. I can taste things. Oh my God. And it's like, and it's
gross.
It is gross.
You're turned off by like gross food things. Get ready. Steel yourself for that one, for sure.
But Kaneko's art style is so amazing. It fits it so well because he does really like kind of like like Sin City a little bit, like this really strong black and whites, very dramatic black and whites, and beautiful. You don't. I guess I always have a hard time when people go, manga style of drawing, right? Because there is no one style of drawing manga.
Correct.
But what makes this one just, I feel, such a great fit for Fantagraphics is it is a beautiful piece of visual storytelling, and Fantagraphics just has such a great catalog of giants of visual storytelling from Europe and Asia and US. So this was just the perfect fit for them, and we were so delighted when Eric Reynolds agreed.
Definitely,
absolutely.
Were you guys excited to kind of share this story? Because I feel like that story is one of the classic ones. Like if you told me recommend a manga or anime like in like the top 25 or whatnot, that one I feel like goes on to most people's lists. So I don't know if it felt kind of nostalgic or kind of glad to kind of bring that story to kind of a newer generation that title just might have gotten lost because we have so much more I guess, content out there now that, like, by the time you get down to that, you're already kind of tired from all the new stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really is like it starts in the same sort of idea of where Dororo starts, and and thematically, but I think Kaneko Sensei just brings so much to the table in terms of choices that he makes about the story very early on and as it progresses. I think there's a lot going on. Um, there's a lot going on in terms of talking about power and power structures and how people and structures sort of like to maintain a status quo that I think is pretty relevant to the discussions that are going on right now about politics. There's a lot making Kyaku and having her parts of her body stolen speaks to bodily autonomy of women as well. Like you can read this as a straight ahead science fiction story about a badass, lady just murdering people that done her wrong. But there's a lot of other stuff in there. So it's and it rewards repeated rereadings. It's doing some stuff with the comics form that I think is really interesting, especially as you get to the end of volume 2, which I'm going to try not to spoil, but there's a moment, there's a chant that happens that sort of carries through the end of volume 2, while lots of different things are happening that starts tying together all of these story threads. That's really powerful and like a little scary. Actually, that's pretty good. It's one of the benefits of serializing this ahead of time is that I think we've hooked a lot of people through the Mangasplaining serialization that are now really itching to see the book release, and that's pretty fun. That's pretty awesome. But you can't deny that, like, yeah, absolutely, this is based on a Tezuka story, and it pays major respect to that story.
Yeah,
but it does resonate today. And I think the fact that Dororo is still in print, and a lot of Tezuka stuff has unfortunately fallen out of print in English, and keeps finding new readers and keeps finding people who love it, is a testament to the strength of that story, just as much as this version, coming out now and hopefully finding its audience, I think will do the same. It'll reinforce that original story, but definitely it's its own thing as well.
Definitely.
I want to give up a little plug too, because next week is San Diego Comic Con, and I'm actually doing a panel on Search and Destroy. Basically, Search and Destroy, Unico, and Team Phoenix. Basically, it's called Discover the Magic of Osamu Tezuka, New Adventures for a New Generation. It's at 2:00 in room 28DE. But basically, I think it's just worth noting, like, this is a panel that our friends at Scholastic put together, to promote Unico. But I also was very strongly said, I want to talk about the other stories too, because I think this is something very special that Tezuka Pro is allowing. Like, Osamu Tezuka died almost 20 years ago, and arguably, one of the most influential storytellers in Japan and maybe the world. And it speaks to the fact that, the heart of the stories have something, can be reinterpreted by other creators and still be very powerful and reimagined and made relevant again for our new generations. And I don't know how many people can say that,
Yeah, not many. So now in your other book coming out in October, is this a first book for you guys, or is this kind of like a second or third one, or you maybe did one digital and now this one is coming into print, or is this completely new first experience?
This is print only, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, we couldn't do digital for this one, unfortunately, but it's nice to have like a little stack of Mangasplaining books now, and the stack's only going to get bigger, so that's fun, especially because 2 of the books are really thick. Yeah, the next book out after Search and Destroy, which is a complete tonal and shift, just like Okinawa to Search and Destroy was very different. Search and Destroy to Gigatown is going to be very different again. And Gigatown is a book that actually Deb scouted. And again, it was one of those ones where, I mean, you'd loved this book for a while since seeing it at the British Museum show and been like, why is this not in English? All right, I'm going to help make it happen in English. Here we go.
I went to the British Museum manga exhibit. It was huge and amazing. It was like in 2019. I went in that summer, and then so that tweet popped up again for me as 5 years later, because the tweet I had done when I took photos at the exhibit, and I said, "Why please someone publish this in English?" And when it came down to it, I had to do it. But it's what makes it kind of unique. It's like these 4-panel comics about the symbols or the iconography that's unique to manga. Some of it is, general comics, iconography, but like some of it's like that little symbol that's supposed to symbolize you're so angry, the veins in your forehead are throbbing. And then there's like, of course the sweat drops, and like those vertical lines that mean like, oh, you're shocked, or you're like, you're dismayed. So there's a lot of very specific visual symbols used in manga. And so this comic book explains it, and it does it using these bunnies and monkeys and toads, who are the characters in one of the earliest examples of visual storytelling in Japan. It's a picture show. It's called the Chojugiga for short. It's a longer name, and I don't have it right now. But it was done, I think, in like the 13th century by a monk, and it's just this painted scroll where it shows these monkeys and rabbits like chasing each other, and they make fun of noblemen and priests, and it's really fun. And you read it horizontally.
It's like one of those really early examples of comics that you might see in a chapter of Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. Like, oh, people were doing comics in the 12th century. Here's some bunnies, and they're like frolicking kind of stuff. And you read it sequentially in sections, just like the Bayeux Tapestry or something like that.
So we knew that not everyone would understand why these bunnies and frogs were the characters. So we had our friend Matt Alt, who is a translator and scholar. He is the author of a book called Pure Invention: How Japan Changed the World, which has all these great stories about like the guy who invented the karaoke machine, and how the one little coin purse sparked the empire that is Hello Kitty. So do pick it up. He also has a podcast too, and he has his own Substack newsletter, and he's such a really fun, and he really makes it really fun and accessible to understand the world of Japanese culture in a way that's not snotty at all. So we're very grateful to him to, do the introduction for Gigatown. And I also want to mention that we also commissioned an introduction to Search and Destroy by Federico Anzalone.
Awesome. Yeah.
And he's a French scholar. And he had interviewed Kaneko Sensei. And so that's the introduction in our book. So we do try to, give these books context, to make it easy, to make it accessible to US readers in a way that, like, if we just published Search and Destroy without the intro, or Gigatown without the intro, and assumed people would understand, I think we'd be missing the point.
Well, I think we'd be missing the point of being Mangasplaining, right? This is our whole job, is explaining this stuff to people who don't know much about it, and adding this context. I'll be honest, I love Matt's introduction, but I think even more than the introduction that Matt did, we got a cover quote, a blurb, which was really nice of him, from Scott McCloud, who did Understanding Comics and Making Comics, and now is going to do a book with Raina Telgemeier that's going to set the world on fire next year. And it's like, oh, I'm picking up this book. It says it's a guide to manga iconography. What does that mean? And down at the bottom of the front cover, it says, Gigatown is the Rosetta Stone of manga iconography, a delightful gift to comic scholars everywhere, Scott McCloud. And now people know, oh, okay, Scott McCloud, I kind of get what this is supposed to be now. And it's Mangasplaining in book form. Matt helps with that tremendously with his introduction of what the Chojugiga is and what these symbols are. Federico does an amazing job in his introduction of Search and Destroy, just like giving context for why Kaneko Sensei is important, why Tezuka is important for people who don't even know that, who missed Astro Boy or something like that somehow. So I think that's we did that with Okinawa by adding an interview and an afterword as well. And our upcoming books are going to have lots of different things that'll do this as well. And it's just our goal basically to bring manga that's a little bit more off the beaten path to people in North America, to readers, whether they're manga fans or not, give them the context that they need to not just understand it, but enjoy it and then sort of hopefully by releasing these projects, we change what is commercial, what is acceptable, what is getting published in North American manga. It's a big goal. I'm not gonna lie, but it's something that we're both really passionate about. We're having a really good time doing.
It's so rewarding to see the books that we are advocating for get noticed and read by people. I mean, you know, I mean, shout out to you. Like, we'd never imagined that we'd get, podcasts like you asking us to talk about Search and Destroy, because, usually manga publicity tends to be only within manga and anime circles. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really great that, you're giving us an opportunity to share this book with your listeners. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And it's crazy too, because I feel like almost every comic book shop that I go into, and I try to visit a lot of the small ones just to see and give business, I would say most of them have a manga section now. I would say in the past 5 years, I have not been to a comic book shop that did not have some smaller, some very, very much it's one side of the store, comics are the other side of the store. But I think that definitely has become the norm now, is because people are definitely looking for both mediums. So I think that definitely will.
Yeah, I mean,
it's so
really
that's
struggle for comic shops, I think, especially comic shops that are not, like a lot of people start comic shops because they're passionate about American comics, right? And they want to sell what they know and they love. And I've heard people tell me, it's like, oh, but I don't know what to buy and put on my shelf for manga. Yeah. And so the comic shops that I feel are really doing well in that department is they get a manga specialist or a fan who helps them make these decisions. Actually, Barnes and Noble does this. Like, I went to a Barnes and Noble in Chicago, and I would talk to the manager there, and he said, "Oh, you want to talk to our manga person?" And it was like this college student who was like telling me, like, "Oh yeah, I pick these all out. I pick out what's going to go on the display. I tell them, like what to buy." And it's like, "You're doing this right, mister. Props to you."
That sounds accurate. Being that we are a Chicago-based podcast, most of the Barnes and Nobles, I find myself having a conversation with someone that made the display, because I said, "All right, these 4 mangas that they put up on display, no one's just going to handpick these. This is not your Hulu or Crunchyroll. This is something that someone specifically put here." And sometimes it's very impressive, the amount of that would never have gotten probably picked from the shelf that are now kind of front and center, that someone did, like, based on these recommendations, try reading these, which is great. I like that Barnes & Noble is trying very hard to really kind of help it flourish. And I think they see a benefit too. And again, thanks for the boom of anime. I think anime has definitely extremely helped manga blow up.
It's interesting because, like, in America is very much a watching culture, TV watching, movie watching culture. And Japan is very much a reading culture. So it's like the manga blows up first and then becomes an anime. And then so when I talk with the Japanese publishers and licensors, they're like, like, why are people like so fixated on season 2 of this anime? Just go read the manga to read the rest of the story.
Correct.
And they're like, oh, people like certain popular series like One Piece and Naruto, you can get 5, 6, 7 seasons of it and get the entire series animated. And so that's created this expectation that all of them will be like that. But I would say the vast majority of the series that get made into anime, it's made as a promotion for the books.
Yeah.
Like,
and the merch.
Yeah, like here's 12 episodes of this series. You're getting a taste of the manga. It ends at a nice little cutoff point, but it leaves it a little open end. It's like, oh, maybe there'll be more later. But it's basically made to sell books in Japan. So there's that disconnect.
Yes, no, that happened. I think I took some people from work. We went to go watch the first Demon Slayer movie. And they all left the theater and they're like, "Oh man, I wonder if we'll ever find out what happens next." I said, "Well, I can tell you now on the car ride home, and we can get into some very dismal details, or you can choose to wait for the show," which now they're finally getting caught up. But yeah, it's extremely funny how people just they like the movie so much, but they don't do a Google search like, let me just see like what's out there for it. and some are daunting. The fact that I kept up with One Piece is amazing. I'm gonna put it on my LinkedIn that I'm still caught up, because
It's an
that
accomplishment.
felt like an impossible. Yeah, that felt like an impossible goal.
Absolutely.
For sure.
That was my pandemic project. Like I would read One Piece and watch the anime episode that was there. I'd watch, and then at the end of the anime episode, I would go back to the book and I read more, and kind of like synced up. So when I finally got caught up with Japan, I was so mad. Because now I'm like the rest of the world, where like, what's going to happen next?
Yes, I cannot stand waiting almost every 2 weeks. That kills me a little bit inside every time.
And
I guess one
does
more
reward you, because like right now it's hitting this
Yes.
climax where everything is.
Oh my God, yes. I will not
It's
say
rewarding
it because
20
this
years
last
of like
chapter.
reading it.
Yes,
Kinda
when
like-
he had done the interview and said like another 5 years I have, and so I finished it. I was like, oh, well, he'll never start wrapping it up. And then especially this last chapter, I said, whoa, didn't you just say that we had like another 5 years? What's going on?
No, things are really, really accelerating, right? So it's like,
Yes.
I think if you want to put it in superhero terms, it's like you could now go back and read all of One Piece again and see all the little Easter eggs he's been planting along the way,
Yes.
and realize like, can you imagine if X-Men was only written by and drawn by one creative team, beginning to end? Can't you
That'd be
like
something.
and how they
Even the Claremont years,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Just
that was
it's like
huge.
what would be possible, right?
Oh my God, so much. That's been such a great job. One last question before we let you guys go. Let me get some information about where everyone can find you. I'm always been curious, especially for fellow manga readers. Do you have a manga that you picked up that you were not sure about, or you thought, I kind of know what this is going to be about, but I'm going to read it so I can do a podcast episode, but you found yourself really enjoying it, much to your dismay, or maybe you were happy that you found it?
Every season we will. So Deb, David, and I pick the books that we make Chip read, and then we all sort of get together and discuss them. And occasionally Chip picks a book, and every season there's someone makes a pick that I'm like, sorry, you're gonna have to edit that out. Every season,
That's fine.
one more. All right. Every season someone makes a pick and I'm like, oh man, I don't want to read that. That sounds terrible. Or I've been actively avoiding that for years. And I'm always pleasantly surprised, because the act of reading a book together with your friends for a podcast or otherwise elevates the book. It's kind of the secret of the podcast, is that like even the mid books that we read, and there's very few of them, do stick with us in different ways for sure. I like even books that I actively disliked at the time. And the biggest one from last season was one called Grappler Baki, which has a Netflix show that adapts part of the anime. That's another one that people want more adaptations of Grappler Baki. And I think there's just enough of that in the world. Even that one, I think back on it and I'm like, yeah, that was so grotesque in a really interesting way. Like the way that they cut that guy's head in half was, not to my taste, but that was, there's something there. And that's kind of the whole podcast, is us going and thinking back on things that were maybe really gross at the time, or distasteful, or not executed to the standard that we would like, but still stick with us and are still funny, or memorable or whatnot. So that's my take. I don't know if Deb has a more specific answer for a title.
I always tell people that David is the chaos master. He has such interesting and diverse taste in manga, and that he'll bring something to the table that I think, wait, what? And then sometimes but I always try to give it the benefit of that, because I know David generally has his reasons, and he generally has pretty good taste. But like, for example, one of the things that he brought to us last season was the series My Next Life as a Villainess, All Routes Lead to Doom.
Yes.
And it's, that's like, villainous stories, I was reborn in the novel and I know how the novel's going to end, but I don't want it to end like that. So I'm going to do things differently. There are so many stories in this genre, right? Almost all following the same formula. So I've almost actively rejected most of them. like if I've read one, I've read them all. But David said, let's read this one. It's really cute and charming. And so we did. I can't say it's on my must-read pile, but it was good to read it together, and we all had a good laugh about it.
It was definitely better than I thought it was going to be, for sure.
It's charming. And it's good-hearted, so it's sometimes that's just nice, sometimes one of the things that's interesting about manga is there's not just people think manga is all the shonen stuff, right? The action, the sword fights, the ninjas, speed lines, explosions. But there's a fair amount of manga that's just people having a lovely day. And they're just having a nice
good old
time.
slice of life.
And it's just kind of calm and nothing happens, And I thought about that and I thought, why is that? And I thought, oh, it's because Japanese people are stressed out.
Your escapist manga is nothing happens.
That's right. Because life's too weird. And then meanwhile in America, like this escapist manga is horror, right?
Yeah. Just like blood-curdling, body-destroying horror.
Yeah, it's like Junji Ito came to Comic-Con last year and he said, oh yeah, horror is really popular in times like this because no matter how scary things are, as a horror reader, everything will kind of make sense in the end. And you can't expect that out of real life, unfortunately. So it's like, wow, I didn't think of it that way. Because I thought, horror would be stressful to read. And he really thought a lot about it.
Definitely. That's funny. And that makes sense when I think about kind of the manga that is popular today. So for everyone listening, we obviously have our books out. So I know Search and Destroy that's already out. Is there the official release date next week is what? Do you know what day?
I believe it's Tuesday.
Yeah, it's the 23rd. Yeah, 23rd.
Yeah. And I believe Gigatown, I think the official release date is something like September 6th.
Is it first week of September or first week of October? You know what? Deb's right. That's a standard answer that you can use. Deb is correct.
Because I've had to say it to a couple people. The other plug the other project I'm working on is the American Manga Awards.
You should totally shout out the American Manga Awards.
We just announced the nominations, and I swear to God, I had no influence on this, but our books got nominated, and it was
we're so proud.
Search and Destroy got nominated for Phil Christie's lettering, and Okinawa got nominated for Best New Edition of Classic Manga. I was not the jury. I basically just had to referee the jury and say, hi, your picks are due today. But it was so nice to do that. So, and please check out if you want to discover new manga, please check out the American Manga Awards nomination site, because we not only have just the titles, and we have links to all the books, websites, we have cover art and sample pages. So it's a great way to discover some books that you may not have heard of before, because our manga judges went deep. Like they picked some stuff I'd never heard of, but they were so passionate, like Soara and the House of Monsters from Seven Seas. It's kind of this fantasy story about a young woman warrior who comes back from the war, and then she builds houses for monsters. It's really charming, and everyone was just like wowed by how special it was. And it wasn't something, as a manga journalist, I had heard almost nothing about this. I had got no press release. I had heard no buzz about it online. So when the judges picked it's been really rewarding to watch the online conversation about some of the books that we've nominated that are a little under the radar. People are, wow, they're right. This is great. So I hope they do that for us too.
Yeah. Perfect. So for everyone listening that is very interested in getting your books, I know you said Search and Destroy is at Barnes and Nobles right now. Is it digital as well, or is it strictly?
Actually, it is digital. So Search and Destroy is Amazon Kindle, Barnes and Noble. Independent comic stores are getting it this week as well. Support your local comic shop if you can, if you got one. It should be digital on some of the library services, I think, later this fall. Yeah, and then Gigatown, A Guide to Manga and Iconography is going to be print only, it looks like. That'll be out this September from Udon Entertainment, not Fantagraphics like Search and Destroy. And yeah, look for Search and Destroy 2, Volume 2 at the beginning of next year. And then upcoming books include Veil, which is a full color manga series, which is a rarity in manga, and we're really stoked about that. And
it's a beautiful romance between a blind woman and a man who's he's like a police
a military soldier or something.
Yeah.
It's all very vague and romantic and beautiful.
Just beautiful.
And the book that Deb's working on right now is coming out hopefully next year as well. It is No Roses Without Thorns, and it's the life of a teenage manga assistant in the 1970s, Deb?
Yeah, working in shoujo manga. So it's
nice.
really fun.
Another manga-splaining-y manga-splainer for the manga-splaining fans.
Perfect.
And we know there's books that we are trying to get the license for now. I mean, this is a continuing process.
Yeah.
And it's, it's really weird because we're such a boutique. We're not even like boutique. We're like micro publisher, you know? But I like to think what comes through is our passion for manga and our passion for good storytelling.
Thanks. I think that's a great way of summing it up too.
Yeah. And then for everyone interested that wants to listen to your podcast or is interested in what you guys are doing, where's the best place to find you guys?
You could just type mangasplaining.com, and that's mangasplaining.com. Or you can search Deb on Twitter. She posts it, looks like every minute. So she'll be at Deb Aoki at Mangasplaining. She'll be very easy to find. And the podcast is on everything. It's Apple and YouTube now. Oh, we're on YouTube now, but it's still not going to be a video podcast because none of us want to do our hair to be on.
We barely wake up in the morning.
Yeah, so that'll be good.
That's exactly why I wear a hat.
Yeah. Oh, I should have worn my hat today. My bad.
I mean, I think what else I want to tell people that Mangasplaining, you don't have to listen to it in order.
Oh yeah,
you can just
drop in anywhere.
And you'll discover something good. And do check out our show notes, because whenever we just go and talk about stuff, and sometimes we'll make references to things. We should try to give you context in the show notes. It's like, what does that word they said, and what's this book they're all laughing about? We explain.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. Thank you for answering our questions. Everyone listening, we have Search and Destroy coming out soon. Be on the lookout in September for the next book. And we will keep you guys updated on our Instagram about when these are coming out. We look forward to watching what you guys do and the books you put out.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, everyone listening. Hope you had a good time. You could watch this video if you already are on YouTube, or you can listen to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts on pretty much any platform. All right, everyone, have a good night.